The grease was already popping when she reached for the flour. You could hear it 2 rooms away, that crack of oil meeting batter, the hiss of something becoming dinner. Kitchens in the 1970s had their own rhythm. Here are 30 meals that instantly tell people you grew up in the 70s. The fondue pot came out on Saturday nights, and if you grew up in the 1970s, you knew the rules before anyone said them. You never let your bread fall off the fork into the cheese. That was a social crime worse than elbows on the table. The Swiss Cheese Union had been running advertisements since the late 1960s, pushing Gruyere and Emmentaler into American living rooms. And by the middle of the decade, fondue sets were the most popular wedding gift in the country. Your mother would melt the cheese with dry white wine and a clove of garlic rubbed inside the pot, and the smell would fill the house like a warm fog. You dipped cubes of French bread, apple slices, sometimes broccoli if someone was being adventurous. The real ones knew you had to stir in a figure 8, never a circle, or the cheese would seize. Nobody does it anymore. The pot is in the basement now, behind the Christmas decorations, and the forks are probably in a drawer nobody opens. Hamburger Helper showed up in 1971, and within 2 years it was in almost every cabinet in America. General Mills designed it to stretch a single pound of ground beef into a meal for 5, and during the recession of '74, that math kept families fed. You browned the meat, dumped in the noodles and the powder packet, added water, and waited. The cheeseburger macaroni was the one everyone reached for first, but the beef stroganoff version had its loyalists, and the potato stroganoff quietly outsold both in the Midwest. Your mother could get dinner on the table in 22 minutes, and nobody complained because it tasted like something that took longer than it did. The little white glove on the box, helping hand they called it, became one of the most recognized mascots in grocery history. Kids who grew up on it either still buy it or refuse to touch it. There is no middle ground. She handed you the bag and said, "Shake it." That was your job. The only job a 7-year-old could be trusted with on a Tuesday night. Shake and bake had been around since 1965, but it hit its stride in the 70s when every kitchen wanted fried chicken crunch without the grease splatter. You dropped the chicken pieces in, one at a time, sealed the top, and shook until the seasoned breadcrumbs coated everything. The secret nobody talked about was leaving the skin on. That was how the coating stuck, how the edges crisped, how the whole thing turned golden in the oven instead of pale and sad. Pork chop night used the same bag, same shake, different flavor packet. The kitchen smelled like paprika and garlic powder for hours, and you ate it with canned corn and instant mashed potatoes and thought that was a complete meal. It was. She made it in the cast iron skillet. Always the cast iron, never a cake pan. Brown sugar went down first, then butter, then the Dole pineapple rings arranged in a perfect circle with maraschino cherries tucked into their centers like jewels. The batter went on top, and for the next 45 minutes the kitchen smelled like caramel and something tropical that had no business being in Ohio in February. When she flipped it, everyone held their breath. The moment it released and hit the plate, golden and glistening and still bubbling at the edges, the whole room exhaled. Pineapple had become a craze in the 1970s thanks to a renewed fascination with Hawaiian culture, tiki bars, luau's, anything that tasted like the islands. But nobody made it like she did. You can follow the recipe exactly, measure every grain of sugar, and it still comes out different. Because the skillet remembers her hands, and yours are not the same. If the pineapple cake was Saturday comfort, quiche was Sunday ambition. In 1970, Quiche Lorraine became the most fashionable thing an American woman could pull from her oven, and Julia Child had everything to do with it. Bacon, eggs, Swiss cheese, and heavy cream poured into a flaky pie crust. It sounded simple, but the technique separated the Sunday cooks from the everyday ones. You had to blind bake the crust with pie weights or dried beans so it would not go soggy under all that custard. The filling needed to set just right, firm at the edges, barely trembling in the center. Too long in the oven and it turned rubbery, too short and it wept. By '75, the phrase "real men don't eat quiche" had entered the language, which only made the women who served it smile harder. They had taken eggs and cream, the cheapest ingredients in the kitchen, and turned them into something guests talked about for weeks. In the 1970s, a green bell pepper was not a side dish. It was a container. You sliced the tops off, scooped out the seeds, and packed them tight with a mixture of ground beef, rice, tomato sauce, and whatever seasoning your mother reached for first. Some families used leftover meatloaf mix, which was its own kind of genius. 2 meals from one batch of seasoned beef. The peppers stood upright in the baking dish like little soldiers, and the tomato sauce pooled around the bottom, bubbling up the sides as the oven did its work. You knew they were ready when the top started to brown and the pepper walls softened, just enough to cut with a fork, but not so much they collapsed. The red and yellow ones were sweeter but cost more, so green was what you got. Nobody called it meal prep. Nobody called it anything. It was just Wednesday. Chicken divan started in a fancy New York restaurant called the Divan Parisian, but by the time it reached your mother's kitchen in the 1970s, it had lost its accent and gained a can of cream of chicken soup. Broccoli went on the bottom of the casserole dish, frozen, never fresh, because fresh broccoli was expensive and nobody could find it in January anyway. Then came the cooked chicken, torn into strips, then the sauce made from that soup, mayonnaise, a squeeze of lemon, and a splash of dry sherry that made the whole house smell like a dinner party. Curry powder was the secret weapon. Just half a teaspoon turned the whole dish golden and mysterious. Breadcrumbs and melted butter went on top, and 30 minutes later you had something that tasted like it came from someone who knew what she was doing. She did. She just never got the credit for it. Nobody could explain why it was green. Not that shade of green, pistachio, electric, almost neon, sitting in a glass bowl on the holiday table like it had arrived from another planet. Watergate salad showed up in the early 1970s, right when Kraft released its pistachio-flavored instant pudding mix, and a recipe they called Pistachio Pineapple Delight got printed on the box. Then the scandal hit, and a food editor in Chicago renamed it, and suddenly every potluck in America had a dish named after a political crisis. You mixed the pudding powder with canned crushed pineapple, juice and all, then folded in miniature marshmallows, chopped pecans, and Cool Whip straight from the tub. No cooking, no baking. 10 minutes, and it was done. The old women who brought it to church suppers never called it Watergate. They called it pistachio fluff or green stuff or just the salad. You ate it and did not ask questions. The brandy hit the pan and the flame shot up, and for 2 full seconds the dining room went quiet. Steak Diane was the most dramatic dish of the 1970s, and the restaurants that served it knew exactly what they were doing. A thin fillet, pounded flat, seared fast in butter, then bathed in a sauce of shallots, garlic, heavy cream, a shot of cognac, and enough cracked black pepper to make your eyes water. The flambe was the whole point. The waiter did it tableside, and if he was good, the fire rose and fell in one clean breath. By the late 70s, nearly every continental restaurant in America had it on the menu. The sauce had Worcestershire and Dijon mustard folded in at the end, which gave it a sharpness that cut through all that cream. Then newer steak preparations arrived, the tableside carts rolled away, and Steak Diane slipped off the menu like a guest who left without saying goodbye. You knew the jingle before you knew the multiplication tables. Rice-A-Roni, the San Francisco treat, sung so many times during Saturday morning cartoons that it buried itself in your brain permanently. The box contained rice, broken vermicelli noodles, and a flavor packet, and the trick was browning the rice and pasta in butter before you added the water. That step, the toasting, was what separated the people who read the directions from the people who just dumped and boiled. The 1978 television commercial showed a cable car and a city skyline and made the whole thing feel cosmopolitan, like you were eating something sophisticated instead of a side dish that cost 49 cents. Your mother served it next to pork chops or baked chicken at least twice a week, and you never once connected it to San Francisco. It was just the yellow box in the pantry, always there, always reliable, always tasting exactly the same. If Rice-A-Roni was the side dish that never changed, Swiss steak was the main course that refused to give up on a cheap cut of beef. Round steak, the toughest, cheapest slab at the butcher counter, got pounded with a meat mallet until the fibers broke down, then dredged in seasoned flour and browned hard in a cast iron skillet. After that came canned tomatoes, sliced onions, sometimes green peppers, and the whole thing went into the oven at 325 for 2 hours until the meat surrendered. The name had nothing to do with Switzerland. It came from the Swissing process, an old textile technique for smoothing fabric, which is what the pounding did to the meat. By the 1970s, it was a weeknight staple in homes where the grocery budget was tight and the oven did the heavy lifting. Your grandmother made it without a recipe, just by feel, and the gravy that formed at the bottom of the dish was worth the entire meal. Nobody has matched that gravy since. In the mid-1970s, chicken Kiev was the most exotic thing you could order at a restaurant or attempt in your own kitchen. A boneless chicken breast, pounded thin, wrapped around a frozen log of herbed butter, then breaded, chilled, and fried or baked until the outside was golden and the inside was a ticking time bomb of melted garlic butter. The moment you cut into it, the butter burst out across the plate, and if you had done it right, everyone at the table gasped. If you had done it wrong, the butter leaked out during cooking, and you served a dry, hollow pocket of breaded disappointment. Despite its name, borrowed from the Ukrainian capital, food historians still argue about where it was actually invented, with claims from both France and Russia. American home cooks discovered it through restaurant menus and frozen food aisles, where Stouffer's sold a version that became a freezer section bestseller. The homemade kind vanished with the women who had the patience to pound, roll, chill, and pray. Black Forest cake arrived in American kitchens like a rumor from Europe. The original, invented in Germany's Schwarzwald region around 1915, was built on layers of chocolate sponge soaked in kirsch, a clear cherry brandy that burned your nose if you leaned too close to the bowl. By the 1970s, every ambitious home baker in the country was attempting it, and every bakery display case had one behind the glass. You stacked the layers, spooned the cherry filling between them, and covered the whole thing in whipped cream and chocolate shavings. The maraschino cherries on top were the American edition, bright red and glistening, nothing like the sour morello cherries the Germans used. Everyone started calling it gateau because saying the French word made it feel more expensive. The women who made it from scratch, who soaked the layers in real kirsch and whipped the cream by hand, are mostly gone now. What is left are grocery store versions under plastic domes, and they are not the same. The beauty of the 7-layer casserole was that you never turned on a burner. Everything went in raw. Uncooked rice on the bottom, then ground beef broken into pieces, then canned tomato sauce, then sliced onions, then green pepper rings, then chopped celery, and finally a layer of bacon draped across the top like a blanket. You sealed it with foil and put it in the oven at 350 for 2 hours, and the rice absorbed every drop of juice from the meat and vegetables above it. The layering order mattered, and the women who made it knew that instinctively. Rice had to be on the bottom or it would not cook through. Bacon had to be on top or it would steam instead of crisp. The recipe showed up in community cookbooks across the Midwest and South through the 1970s, always handwritten, always with a note that said, "Do not stir." That was the only rule, and it was absolute. Years before the 7-layer casserole made it to the church supper, someone in the early 1970s decided to pour a cocktail into a cake, and nobody stopped her. The Harvey Wallbanger cake was named after the drink, vodka, orange juice, and a bright yellow Italian liqueur called Galliano, and it was made by dumping a box of yellow cake mix, a packet of instant vanilla pudding, 4 eggs, a half cup of vegetable oil, and generous pours of all 3 liquors into a bundt pan. The glaze on top used powdered sugar and more Galliano, which meant the cake was boozy twice over. It showed up at church potlucks, PTA meetings, and neighborhood block parties, and the women who brought it never mentioned the alcohol content. You ate 2 slices and felt warm in a way that had nothing to do with fellowship. The recipe circulated on index cards and in newspaper food columns, and then it vanished, along with the cocktail it was named for. The name alone brought kids to the table. Porcupine meatballs got their name because the long-grain rice mixed into the ground beef poked out like little quills once the meat shrank during cooking. The recipe dated back to the Great Depression, when families stretched a half-pound of beef with a cup of rice and called it dinner, but it was still showing up on weeknight tables well into the late 1970s. You shaped them by hand, smaller than regular meatballs, firm enough to hold together, and simmered them in a bath of Campbell's condensed tomato soup thinned with water. Some families used cream of mushroom instead, which turned the sauce pink and thick. The whole pot bubbled on the stove for 30 minutes, and when you lifted the lid, the steam smelled like tomato and beef and something faintly sweet from the rice. Your mother made them without measuring. A handful of this, a pinch of that. When she stopped making them, the recipe did not survive the translation to paper. If you went to a cocktail party in the 1970s and there was no Rumaki on the tray, you were at the wrong party. Chicken livers and water chestnuts, marinated overnight in soy sauce and brown sugar, then wrapped tight in bacon and broiled until the outside crisped and the inside stayed velvety. The dish first appeared on the menu at Don the Beachcomber in Palm Springs in 1941, then spread to Trader Vic's, and by the 70s, it was the appetizer that signaled your hosts had taste and ambition. The water chestnut gave it a crunch that shocked people who expected softness, and the soy sugar marinade caramelized against the bacon in a way that made the whole bite sweet, salty, and smoky at once. You picked them up with toothpicks and tried not to eat 6 in a row. Kids hated them. The word liver was enough to clear the room, but the adults circled that tray like it was the only thing worth standing near. Before 1977, the phrase pasta primavera did not exist in most American kitchens. Then Le Cirque, one of the most famous restaurants in New York City, put spaghetti loaded with fresh vegetables on the menu, and suddenly every home cook in the country wanted to know how to make it. The original version used whatever was in season: zucchini, broccoli, mushrooms, tomatoes, snap peas, tossed with garlic, olive oil, and a finish of cream and Parmesan. It sounded healthy, which mattered in the late 70s when the first health food wave was rolling through suburban grocery stores. Restaurants everywhere copied it within months. Home cooks adapted it with frozen mixed vegetables and jarred Alfredo sauce, which was not the same thing but filled the same space on the plate. The word primavera means spring in Italian, and for a few years it made every weeknight dinner feel like something was blooming. That feeling faded when the dish became ordinary. 3 ingredients. That is all it took to make the dish that vanished first at every single potluck, church supper, and neighborhood party in the 1970s. A jar of grape jelly, a bottle of chili sauce, and a bag of frozen meatballs, dumped together in a slow cooker and left alone for 4 hours. The combination sounded wrong. Grape jelly on meatballs should not work, and yet the sweet, tangy glaze that formed as the jelly melted and married the chili sauce created something people fought over with toothpicks. The real argument was never about the recipe. It was about who made them best. Every church had 2 women who both claimed ownership, and the tension between them could fill a fellowship hall. You took from both trays and said nothing. The recipe showed up in junior league cookbooks and PTA fundraiser collections from coast to coast, always written in someone's looping cursive. Most of those index cards are in boxes now, in kitchens that belong to someone else. If the grape jelly meatballs were the people's food, beef Wellington was the performance. A whole beef tenderloin, seared fast on every side, then wrapped in mushroom duck cells and pâté, and sealed inside a golden shell of puff pastry. Bon Appetit featured it in 1971, and for the rest of the decade it was the dish that said you were trying to impress someone important. The preparation took hours. You had to cook the mushrooms until every drop of moisture was gone, spread the pâté thin, wrap everything tight in plastic, and chill it so the pastry would not go soggy. Then you baked it and prayed. Cutting into it was the moment of truth. Pink in the center meant glory. Gray meant you had ruined an expensive piece of beef in front of your dinner guests. The women who pulled it off earned a reputation that lasted years. The ones who got it wrong once rarely attempted it again. That kind of kitchen courage does not come around often anymore. Chicken Tetrazzini was named after Luisa Tetrazzini, an Italian opera singer who performed at the Palace Hotel in San Francisco in the early 1900s. and the original version was rich with butter, sherry, mushrooms, and freshly grated Parmesan. By the time it reached 1970s kitchens, it had become the ultimate leftover rescue mission. The day after Thanksgiving, women across the country pulled the turkey carcass apart, shredded the meat, and folded it into a casserole of spaghetti, canned cream of mushroom soup, and whatever cheese was in the refrigerator. The boxed spaghetti replaced the fresh pasta. The canned soup replaced the bechamel. The sherry stayed because that one detail made them feel like they were still making something elegant. It baked until the top turned golden and the edges bubbled, and it fed the family for 2 more days after the holiday was already over. The leftovers had leftovers, and nobody minded. That was the whole point. It was on every plate next to every main course, in every household that had a box grater and a bag of carrots. Carrot raisin salad, shredded carrots, plump raisins, and enough mayonnaise to hold it all together was the side dish that nobody asked for and everybody ate. Some families added crushed pineapple for sweetness. Others threw in a handful of chopped walnuts for crunch. The recipe required no cooking, no heat, no skill beyond the patience to grate carrots until your knuckles complained. It appeared in school cafeterias, hospital trays, and every potluck table from 1972 to 1983, and then it simply stopped showing up. No one announced its departure. No one mourned it at the time. But if you put a bowl of it on a table today, every person over 50 in the room would go quiet for a second, spoon some onto their plate, and taste something they had not thought about in 30 years. You could always tell who had a pastry bag and who was faking it. Duchess potatoes required a star tip, a steady hand, and the kind of patience that most weeknight dinners did not allow. You boiled russet potatoes until they fell apart, passed them through a ricer. Never a masher, the lumps would ruin everything. Then folded in egg yolks, butter, a grating of nutmeg, and salt. The mixture went into a piping bag fitted with a large open star tip, and you piped rosettes or spirals onto a baking sheet, each one identical if you knew what you were doing. A brush of egg wash gave them the golden shine, and 10 minutes under the broiler turned the edges crisp while the centers stayed impossibly soft. In the 1960s and 70s, they were the fanciest side dish a home cook could serve, a signal that tonight's dinner was not ordinary. The ones your aunt made looked like they belonged in a French restaurant. Nobody pipes potatoes anymore. The whole trick was the fork. You baked a white cake from a box mix, let it cool just barely, then stabbed the entire surface with a fork until it looked like it had been attacked. Then you poured a full packet of prepared Jell-O, liquid, still warm, bright red or orange or lime green, directly over the top and watched it seep into every hole, staining the cake in streaks of color that went all the way through. The recipe appeared on the back of Jell-O boxes in the early 1970s, a marketing move designed to sell more gelatin, and it worked beyond anything the company expected. Cool Whip went on top, a thick white layer that hid the neon chaos underneath until you sliced into it and the cross-section revealed what you had done. Kids loved it because it looked like a science experiment. Adults loved it because it required no skill and never failed. It was the dessert that proved you did not have to be talented to make something people remembered. If the poke cake was the dessert that asked nothing of you, chicken Marbella was the dinner that asked for everything. The recipe came from the Silver Palette Cookbook, published in 1979 by Julie Rosso and Sheila Lukens, and it demanded ingredients most American pantries had never seen together: dried prunes, green olives, capers, garlic cloves by the dozen, red wine vinegar, and enough oregano to perfume the entire house. You marinated the chicken overnight, which meant you had to plan a full day ahead, which meant you had to care. Brown sugar went on before it hit the oven, and the sauce that formed at the bottom of the roasting pan was sweet, sour, salty, and bitter all at once. It became the most requested dish at dinner parties in the early 1980s, but the women who discovered it first, the ones who bought that cookbook the year it came out, cooked it with a kind of excitement that is hard to find in a kitchen today. Before the guests arrived, someone had to fill the celery. That job usually fell to the youngest daughter or the aunt who showed up early, And it was done quietly at the kitchen counter while the real cooking happened behind her. You washed the ribs, cut them into 3-inch pieces, and piped cream cheese mixed with chopped green olives into the hollow groove, or pimento cheese pressed in with the back of a butter knife. A dusting of paprika on top, because in the 1970s, paprika was the universal signal that someone had made an effort. The stuffed celery went on the relish tray alongside carrot sticks, radish roses, and black olives speared on toothpicks, and it was always the first thing touched and the last thing praised. Nobody thanked you for filling the celery. It was expected, invisible, essential. The relish tray itself has disappeared from most holiday tables, and with it went the woman who stood at the counter, filling each piece by hand, saying nothing. Every holiday party had one, and every family argued about whose was better. The cheese ball, a dense orb of cream cheese, shredded cheddar, Worcestershire sauce, garlic powder, and a dash of hot sauce, rolled in chopped pecans or walnuts until it looked like something pulled from the earth, sat in the center of the table surrounded by Ritz crackers and waited. The first known cheese ball in American history was a 1,235-pound wheel of cheese created in Cheshire, Massachusetts in 1801 as a gift for President Thomas Jefferson. The 1970s version was smaller but no less significant. Your grandmother shaped hers on Friday night, wrapped it in wax paper, and let it chill until Saturday's party. The pecans were always hand-chopped, never pre-crushed, because the size of the nut piece mattered to her. After she died, 3 different relatives attempted the recipe from memory. None of them got it right. The Waldorf salad had been around since the 1890s, when the maître d'hôtel at New York's Waldorf Astoria Hotel first combined apples, celery, and mayonnaise on a bed of lettuce. But it was the 1970s that turned it into a fixture at every ladies' luncheon, bridal shower, and garden club meeting in suburban America. Crisp Granny Smith apples, diced celery, halved red grapes, and chopped walnuts, all folded into a dressing that was equal parts mayonnaise and quiet pride. Some women added raisins or miniature marshmallows, which horrified the purists but delighted the kids. It was served on a single lettuce leaf, always, as if the leaf were a plate beneath the plate. The women who brought it to those luncheons are in their 80s now, or they are gone, and the luncheons went with them. The garden club dissolved. The silver serving spoons ended up at estate sales. And the salad sits in a recipe box in a kitchen drawer that a granddaughter has not yet opened. If you opened a kitchen cabinet anywhere in the 1970s and did not find a can of Campbell's cream of mushroom soup, you were in the wrong house. That single red and white can held together every casserole in America. It bound the chicken to the rice, the tuna to the noodles, the green beans to the fried onions, the ground beef to whatever else was on hand. It was the glue, the sauce, the shortcut, and the secret that nobody considered a secret because everyone already knew. You did not cook with it so much as build with it, layering it under cheese or over meat or stirring it into things that had no business tasting as good as they did. Campbell's sold more cans of cream of mushroom soup in that decade than in any other period in the company's history. The women who used it were not ashamed. They had families to feed and 20 minutes to do it, and that gray, salty, quietly delicious soup never let them down. The Magic Pan opened in San Francisco in 1965. And by the mid-70s, it had become a chain with locations across the country, each one serving crepes filled with everything from ham and Swiss cheese to strawberries and whipped cream. Suddenly, every woman in America wanted a crepe pan. The batter was simple: eggs, flour, milk, a pinch of salt, melted butter. But the technique was not. You poured a thin stream into a hot, lightly greased pan, swirled it fast with a flick of the wrist, and waited for the edges to curl before you flipped it with your fingers. If you hesitated, it tore. If you rushed, it folded. Your mother learned by failing and then getting it right, and after that she could do it without looking, standing at the stove on a Sunday morning, batter in one hand, spatula in the other. She is not standing there anymore. Red dye number 2 gave American candies, cereals, and sodas their vibrant crimson color through the 1960s and early 1970s. So common it appeared in everything from Kool-Aid to hot dog casings. Children ate brightly colored treats without a thought, and manufacturers relied on it to make products irresistible. The controversy erupted when scientists suggested the dye might cause cancer and birth defects in animals. Though results were inconclusive, the FDA banned it in 1976 under the Delaney Clause, prohibiting any additive shown to cause cancer in animals regardless of dosage. The ban panicked candy manufacturers who quickly reformulated, and some temporarily stopped producing red-colored items. The European Union, Canada, and dozens of nations kept amaranth legal, where it continues coloring foods and cosmetics without restriction. America's precautionary approach cost consumers a common coloring that much of the world still considers perfectly safe. But long before any of those bottles or skillets came out, the day in most American kitchens started with a pot on the stove that had been set the night before. Steel-cut oats took 40 minutes to cook properly, and the women who made them knew you couldn't rush it. The oats were whole, not rolled flat, not steamed, not instant. Just the groat chopped into pieces with a steel blade, dense and chewy and filling in a way that held you until lunch. A bowl with whole milk, a drizzle of blackstrap molasses, maybe some butter stirred in while it was still hot. That breakfast built bones and steadied blood sugar without anyone using those words. The soluble fiber wrapped around cholesterol and carried it out quietly, the way good food does its work. Then Quaker released the flavored instant packets: apple cinnamon, maple brown sugar, peaches, and cream. Each one loaded with added sugar and stripped of the texture that made the original worth eating. The slow pot disappeared from the morning routine, and nothing that replaced it came close. Broccoli rice casserole in the 1970s was the definition of comfort meeting convenience. Made with tender broccoli florets, fluffy rice, and a creamy sauce often built from condensed soup, it quickly became a go-to for potlucks and family dinners. Cheddar cheese was the common topping, melted into a bubbling golden layer that begged to be spooned through. It was the kind of dish that could stretch a small amount of ingredients into something that fed a crowd without feeling skimpy. The 1970s kitchen was full of casserole innovations, and this one stood out because it combined wholesome vegetables with the indulgence of cheese and creaminess. For busy parents, it could be assembled ahead of time, baked when needed, and served straight from the same dish, minimizing cleanup. For guests, it was familiar enough to be comforting but had just enough richness to feel like a treat. Whether on the Sunday table or at a church supper, broccoli rice casserole earned its place as a dependable classic. It spoke to the decades' love for one-dish meals that brought people together over something warm, hearty, and easy to share. Sassafras root beer was once America's most beloved homemade soft drink, a sweet, earthy brew made from bark and roots of sassafras trees growing wild across the eastern states. Families sipped it at county fairs, front porches, and picnics, its flavor unlike anything on the market. The key ingredient was saffrole, the aromatic oil giving sassafras its signature warmth. In 1960, the FDA declared saffrole a carcinogen after rats developed liver tumors when given massive doses far beyond normal human consumption. The ban forced every root beer manufacturer to reformulate with artificial flavoring, fundamentally changing the taste of America's classic soda. Sassafras remains legal across parts of Europe, Asia, and South America, where it flavors teas, candies, and medicines without restriction. The root beer Americans drink today carries only a shadow of its original flavor, a sanitized version of something that once tasted like the countryside itself. If you ever tasted a pie crust that shattered at the first bite and melted into something impossibly flaky, it was made with lard. Not shortening, not butter, not the vegetable oil blends that lined shelves by the 1980s, lard. Rendered pork fat, pure and unprocessed, kept in a tin or a crock near the stove. USDA data shows lard consumption dropped 78% between 1909 and 2010, while salad and cooking oils surged 329%. The switch was sold as a heart-healthy upgrade, but the hydrogenated oils that replaced lard, Crisco, margarines, industrial shortenings, carried trans fats far more dangerous than the animal fat they displaced. She fried in lard because it held heat steady, didn't smoke, and made everything taste richer. She greased the cast iron with it and never once worried about the jar on the shelf, because she was cooking the way people had cooked for centuries, and the results spoke for themselves. Sloppy lentil sliders were a clever way to enjoy the sloppy Joe craze on a budget, swapping ground beef for lentils simmered in tangy tomato sauce. These mini patties were packed with flavor and nutrients, but cost a fraction of traditional meat sliders, making them a popular choice for families tightening their belts. Lentils provided a meaty texture that held together well when formed into small slider-sized patties, which were then topped with the signature sloppy Joe sauce. Served on small buns or even plain bread, these sliders brought joy to dinner tables without denting wallets. This dish embodied the spirit of 1970s thriftiness, taking a beloved classic and making it accessible to all income levels. The warm, tangy sauce paired perfectly with the hearty lentils, satisfying appetites and stretching meals further. It was a great way to introduce plant-based proteins before such ideas became mainstream, showcasing the timeless nature of creative, budget-friendly cooking. Kinder Surprise eggs were the chocolate treasure every American child returning from European vacation begged to smuggle through customs. A hollow chocolate egg containing a plastic capsule with a collectible toy inside. Since their 1974 invention in Italy, billions sold annually across Europe, Asia, and South America. Children loved the combination of chocolate and surprise, and collecting the toys became a multi-generational hobby. America banned them under the 1938 Federal Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act, which prohibits non-nutritive objects embedded within food, a regulation designed to prevent choking hazards. Customs agents confiscated tens of thousands from travelers' luggage, treating beloved candy like contraband. The manufacturer created Kinder Joy for America, separating chocolate from toy. But enthusiasts insist it cannot compare. Over 100 countries sell authentic Kinder Surprise eggs without incident, making this one of the most puzzling food prohibitions on the planet. In the 1960s and 70s, wheat germ sat in a jar on the counter the way salt and pepper sat on the table everywhere else. You sprinkled it on cereal, stirred it into yogurt, folded it into muffin batter. The germ is the reproductive heart of the wheat kernel, the part that would become a new plant, carrying concentrated vitamin E, B vitamins, zinc, and essential fatty acids. When steel roller milling arrived in 1879, flour production began stripping the germ out because its natural oils shortened shelf life. What the factory removed for convenience was exactly what your body needed most. Adele Davis, the nutritionist whose books changed how a generation of mothers fed their kids, recommended it in everything she wrote. By the 80s, the jar had faded from most kitchens, replaced by enriched flour that gave back a fraction of what milling took. Cheese and pickle toasties offered a warm, tangy snack that was a common fixture in vintage American cookbooks. These toasties combined melted cheese with pickles, sandwiched between slices of bread and grilled or toasted until golden and bubbly. The contrasting flavors of creamy cheese and sharp pickles created a satisfying balance that made this snack appealing across age groups. Quick to assemble and easy to cook, cheese and pickle toasties became a favorite when a simple yet flavorful snack was needed without fuss. The recipe's enduring popularity stemmed from its use of accessible ingredients and the way it elevated basic staples into a tasty treat. These toasties often brought a sense of nostalgia, reminding many of afternoons spent at home or school with comforting homemade snacks. They exemplify how mid-century cooks combined familiar flavors in straightforward ways to deliver maximum enjoyment with minimal effort. The warm, crispy exterior and gooey filling remain a hallmark of this beloved classic. Horse meat appeared on American tables more often than most realize, particularly during both world wars when beef was rationed and families needed affordable protein. Butcher shops in cities with large European immigrant populations openly sold it, and French, Belgian, Italian, and Japanese communities considered it a lean, nutritious alternative. The meat was red, slightly sweet, and tender when prepared correctly. Beginning in the 1970s, cultural sentiment against eating horses, viewed increasingly as companions, led to legislative actions making horse slaughter for consumption effectively impossible. Congress defunded USDA inspection of slaughter facilities, and several states passed outright bans. France, Belgium, Italy, Japan, and dozens of countries consume horse meat regularly, selling it in dedicated shops and serving it as tartare, steaks, and cured meats. Americans export thousands of horses annually to Canada and Mexico for slaughter, yet cannot eat the meat themselves. She started the pot the night before, every single time. A chicken carcass, a ham hock, or beef bones saved in a bag in the freezer. Nothing went to waste in that kitchen. The broth simmered for hours, sometimes overnight on the lowest flame, filling the house with a smell so deep and savory it pulled you out of bed before the sun came up. That slow extraction drew out collagen, calcium, magnesium, and glycine, nutrients that modern science now sells back to you in expensive supplement form. But she wasn't thinking about amino acids. She was making soup, or the base for gravy, or just a warm cup of broth with salt for someone who felt sick. Then came the bouillon cube, the canned stock, the carton of sodium-loaded liquid with ingredients you couldn't pronounce. The bones went into the garbage instead of the pot, and a whole tradition of slow, mineral-rich cooking disappeared inside a single generation. You can buy bone broth now for $8 a jar. It doesn't come close. Baked bean and hot dog bake turned two of the cheapest grocery staples into something both kids and adults could not wait to eat. Large cans of baked beans were stirred together with sliced hot dogs and baked until the mixture was bubbling and thick, filling the kitchen with a sweet, smoky aroma. A topping of breadcrumbs or shredded cheese was sometimes added if the budget allowed, turning it into something even more special. The natural sweetness of the beans balanced perfectly with the salty smokiness of the hot dogs, making it taste indulgent even though it cost very little to prepare. This was the kind of dish you could bring to a school potluck, a church supper, or a casual weeknight dinner and know it would be gone in minutes. Some cooks tossed in chopped onions, peppers, or even a splash of mustard for extra tang, while others kept it simple for the pickiest eaters. Served alongside cornbread or a crisp green salad, it was a complete, satisfying meal that embodied the thrifty yet crowd-pleasing spirit of 1970s home cooking. Haggis was a familiar dish in Scottish-American communities, a savory pudding of minced sheep organs mixed with oatmeal, onions, and spices, encased in the animal's stomach lining. Scottish immigrants brought their national dish during waves of immigration, serving it at Burns night suppers, Highland games, and family celebrations. The dish carried deep cultural significance, representing Scottish identity and the tradition of using every part of the animal. In 1971, the USDA ruled livestock lungs could not be saved for human consumption, effectively banning authentic haggis because sheep lung is essential. The regulations cited concerns that lungs could harbor contaminants inhaled during the animal's lifetime. Scottish Americans were forced to smuggle haggis or settle for modified versions without lung, which purists consider unacceptable. Scotland and the United Kingdom continue celebrating haggis as a national treasure, the centerpiece of Burns Night enjoyed by millions every January. The crock sat in the basement or on the back porch of German-American households across the Midwest and Pennsylvania, heavy stoneware, a plate weighted on top, and inside, shredded cabbage slowly transforming through lactic acid fermentation into something sharp and alive. The women who made it every fall didn't call it a probiotic. They called it putting up cabbage, and they did it with nothing but salt and thyme. The fermentation produced lactobacillus cultures that supported digestion and immune function, the same organisms modern supplements try to deliver in a capsule for $12 a bottle. Then the supermarket version arrived, pasteurized and sealed, the heat killing every living culture the original depended on. You can still buy sauerkraut, but most of what sits on the shelf is dead food wearing the old name. Clam dip in the 1970s was a cocktail party essential, the kind of appetizer that seemed to draw guests like a magnet. Made from minced clams blended into cream cheese or sour cream, it was seasoned with lemon juice, Worcestershire sauce, and a hint of garlic. Served chilled with an array of crackers, chips, or crudités, it provided a rich, briny contrast to the other finger foods on offer. It was a dish that managed to be both sophisticated and accessible, appealing to seafood lovers and the simply curious alike. Many hosts appreciated how quickly it could be assembled, often just minutes before guests arrived. In the 1970s, when entertaining at home was often a regular weekend event, having a reliable, crowd-pleasing dip in the repertoire was invaluable. Clam dip's creamy base and subtle seafood flavor made it stand out without overpowering other flavors on the table. Paired with a crisp white wine or a classic cocktail, it set the tone for a relaxed yet polished gathering. For many, it is still a taste that instantly recalls the hum of conversation and the clink of glasses from decades past. Cyclamate-sweetened sodas dominated the American diet drink market through the 1960s, offering calorie-free sweetness rivaling sugar in satisfaction. This artificial sweetener appeared in diet colas, canned fruit, and children's vitamins, controlling roughly 30% of the sweetener market by 1968. Families trusted it as a modern miracle, all the sweetness without the calories. In 1969, a study linked cyclamate to bladder cancer in rats, and the FDA banned it entirely. The decision forced manufacturers to scramble for alternatives. What makes this ban remarkable is that over 50 countries, including Canada, the European Union, and most of Asia, never followed suit. They reviewed the same science and concluded cyclamate was safe at normal consumption levels. Today, it remains one of the most widely used artificial sweeteners on the planet, found in diet drinks across the globe, while Americans have never tasted it again. Before anyone decided fat was the enemy, whole milk was what your family poured over everything. Cereal, oatmeal, cornbread crumbled into a glass at night. It came from local dairies in glass bottles with the cream still floating at the top, and you shook it before you poured because that cream was the whole point. Whole milk carried calcium, vitamin D, conjugated linoleic acid, and enough fat to help your body actually absorb it all. Then the 1977 McGovern Committee dietary goals told Americans to switch to skim, and the country obeyed. Consumption dropped 42% from its 1970 levels. The old women in your family never switched. They poured whole milk into their coffee, their cornbread batter, and over their grandchildren's bowls without apology, because they understood something the dietary guidelines didn't. Your body needs the fat to use the food. Sweet potato and raisin mash was a simple yet comforting side dish that brought together the natural sweetness of canned sweet potatoes with juicy raisins in an effortless mash. Popular during the 1960s, this recipe capitalized on pantry staples that required minimal prep but delivered satisfying flavor and texture. The sweet potatoes were mashed until smooth and mixed with plump raisins, creating a balance of creamy and chewy elements. Often served alongside main courses, this dish was prized for its sweetness and convenience, making it a common choice for busy weeknight dinners or holiday meals. Its quick preparation time fit well into the 10-minute recipe trend, offering families a way to add variety and warmth to the table without complex cooking techniques. While modern variations of sweet potato dishes tend to be more elaborate, the straightforward sweet potato and raisin mash stands as a nostalgic reminder of the resourceful, flavorful meals that defined 1960s American kitchens. Casu marzu cheese was a delicacy Sardinian American families whispered about. A pecorino deliberately infested with live insect larvae that broke down fats into an intensely flavored, almost liquid spread. The larvae gave casu marzu its characteristic soft texture and sharp flavor devotees described as unforgettable. Making it required patience, wheels of pecorino were left open for cheese flies to lay eggs, and larvae digested the hard cheese from within over weeks. The FDA banned it under regulations prohibiting foods containing insects, classifying it as adulterated and unfit for consumption. Health concerns centered on the possibility that larvae could survive stomach acid and cause intestinal damage. Sardinia and parts of Corsica continue producing casu marzu as a treasured tradition, though even the European Union has complicated its legal status. Those who have tasted it describe an experience challenging every assumption about cheese, intensely alive and irreplaceable. The old men ate them straight from the can with a fork and a sleeve of saltine crackers. No plate, no fuss, just the lid peeled back and the silver-skinned fish lined up in olive oil. Sardines were the cheapest protein in the grocery store through the 1950s, 60s, and 70s, and quietly one of the most nutritious foods on Earth. A single 3 3/4 ounce can deliver 35% of your daily calcium because you ate the bones, along with 343% of your vitamin B12 and a full dose of omega-3 fatty acids, all with the lowest mercury levels the FDA had measured in any fish. Your grandfather mashed them onto toast. Your father packed them in his lunch pail, and somewhere between the rise of fast food and the fall of the lunch counter, they slipped out of the rotation entirely. Mock chicken salad cleverly used canned water chestnuts and mayonnaise to recreate the crunchy, creamy texture of traditional chicken salad without the expense of real poultry. This budget-friendly recipe allowed families to enjoy the familiar flavors of a classic lunch without splurging on meat, especially during times when fresh chicken might be hard to come by or too costly. The water chestnuts added a satisfying crunch that mimicked shredded chicken, while mayo brought creaminess and tang. Adding a few pantry staples like chopped celery, onions, or pickle relish enhanced the flavor and kept costs low. This salad was perfect served on bread, crackers, or as a simple side, and it helped stretch limited resources in a creative way. In the 1970s, when convenience and thrift were essential in kitchens, recipes like this made a big difference. Mock chicken salad proved that affordable ingredients could come together to create a satisfying, familiar meal with minimal fuss and maximum flavor. Ackee fruit was a familiar ingredient in Caribbean American kitchens across Miami and New York. A bright red and yellow fruit with creamy, buttery flesh, perfect for Jamaica's national dish of ackee and saltfish. Families who grew up eating this staple naturally wanted to continue preparing it in America. The fruit carries a dangerous secret. When unripe, ackee contains hypoglycin A, a toxin causing violent vomiting, seizures, and potentially fatal drops in blood sugar. The FDA banned fresh ackee importation entirely, citing difficulty ensuring every fruit was properly ripened. Only specially processed canned ackee from approved facilities is permitted, and even those face rigorous inspection and frequent rejection. Jamaica and much of the Caribbean continue eating fresh ackee daily. Families know how to identify ripe fruit safely, knowledge passed through generations. The ban separates an entire immigrant community from their most culturally significant food. If the fermentation crock told one kind of kitchen story, cottage cheese told another, simpler, quieter, and just as honest. In the 1960s and 70s, it was everywhere, scooped onto half a peach at lunch counters, packed into Tupperware for work, eaten straight from the container by women who understood that high protein and low cost meant more than any label could promise. Richard Nixon famously ate it with ketchup, which was his business, but the rest of America had better sense. Fresh strawberries, canned pineapple, a handful of grapes. It was naturally rich in casein protein, calcium, and the live cultures that come with real fermented dairy. Then the flavored yogurt aisle exploded in the 1980s, each cup loaded with corn syrup and fruit-flavored sugar gel and cottage cheese, plain, unglamorous, unmarketed, faded to the back of the dairy case. It had sold itself for decades until something sweeter took its place. Bulgur wheat pilaf with vegetables reflected the growing interest in health-conscious eating during the 1970s, but it was also an inexpensive way to make a filling meal. Bulgur was a grain that cooked quickly and absorbed flavors beautifully, making it a great base for sautéed onions, peppers, carrots, and sometimes a handful of herbs. It provided a nutty taste and a hearty texture, yet was much cheaper than meat-based dishes. This pilaf could be served as a main course for a light dinner or as a side dish to stretch more expensive proteins. Health food stores were becoming more common during this decade, and recipes like bulgur pilaf bridged the gap between nutrition and frugality. It could be made in large batches for just a few dollars, making it perfect for budget-minded families. The subtle flavors made it versatile, so leftovers could be repurposed into stuffed peppers or served cold as a salad. For those who wanted to eat well without spending much, Bulgur wheat pilaf with vegetables proved that healthy and affordable could absolutely go hand in hand. Unpasteurized young cheeses like authentic Camembert de Normandie and Brie de Meaux were once available to American cheese lovers seeking imported European varieties. These raw milk cheeses, aged fewer than 60 days, carried complex flavors pasteurized versions could not replicate, with living cultures creating textures that evolved from purchase to plate. French cheesemakers had perfected these recipes over centuries. The FDA's 60-day aging rule banned these cheeses from American markets, citing concerns about bacteria like Listeria and Salmonella. Americans could only purchase pasteurized imitations or older cheeses aged past the threshold. France, Italy, and Switzerland consider these cheeses essential cultural heritage, protected by law and celebrated at markets and family tables without restriction. The ban remains among the most debated food regulations in America, with lovers arguing centuries of safe European consumption proved the caution excessive. You didn't want it. Nobody wanted it. But every morning, your grandmother stood at the counter with that dark amber bottle and a tablespoon, and you opened your mouth because you didn't have a choice. Cod liver oil was the daily ritual in Scandinavian, British, and German-American households for generations, one spoonful delivering more vitamins A and D than almost any other single food on Earth, plus omega-3 fatty acids that protected hearts and bones before anyone had a name for them. Inland families bought it from brands like Scott's Emulsion, advertised in newspapers since the 1800s. By the 1980s, synthetic multivitamins in candy-colored tablets replaced the spoon, and the bottle vanished from the medicine cabinet. She never explained why she gave it to you. She just did, the same way her mother did, not because she read a study, but because the children who took it didn't get sick as often. Absinthe was the drink of American bohemians and European immigrants, a potent anise-flavored spirit that turned cloudy when diluted with water through elaborate rituals involving sugar cubes and slotted spoons. Distilled from wormwood, anise, and fennel, it carried a mystique no other spirit could match. The controversy centered on thujone, a compound blamed for hallucinations and violent behavior. Claims modern science has largely debunked. America banned absinthe in 1912, and the prohibition survived nearly a century, outlasting alcohol prohibition itself. When finally re-legalized in 2007, the FDA imposed strict limits requiring less than 10 parts per million of thujone, a standard traditional European versions often exceed. France, Switzerland, and the Czech Republic never abandoned their traditions, producing full-strength versions Americans cannot legally purchase. The absinthe in American liquor stores today is a tamed version, legal but stripped of the compound that defined its legendary reputation. Blackstrap molasses was the dark, bitter syrup left over after sugarcane had been boiled down 3 times, the part the sugar industry discarded. But the families who knew its worth kept a jar in the pantry the way other households kept a spearin'. 1 tablespoon delivered more iron than a serving of red meat, more calcium than a glass of milk, and enough magnesium and potassium to make a modern supplement label look thin. Gaylord Hauser, the nutritionist who advised Hollywood stars like Greta Garbo and Gloria Swanson, named it one of his 5 wonder foods in the 1940s, and the FDA got so nervous about his claims they seized copies of his bestseller Look Younger, Live Longer in 1951. Mothers stirred it into oatmeal, baked it into brown bread, and mixed it with warm milk as a bedtime drink. It tasted like the earth it came from, dark, mineral-rich, almost medicinal, and that was exactly the point. Pois's cheese carried a reputation so powerful that French law banned it from public transportation. Its pungent aroma could clear an entire train car. This washed-rind cheese from Burgundy was made with raw cow's milk and bathed in Marc de Bourgogne brandy during aging, developing an orange crust and creamy interior with flavors ranging from earthy to intensely barnyard. Napoleon reportedly declared it his favorite cheese. The FDA's prohibition on raw milk cheeses aged fewer than 60 days locked Pois's out of America, since authentic versions require shorter aging periods falling below the threshold. Pasteurized versions exist but lack the complexity raw milk provides. France continues celebrating époisses as a protected cultural treasure, served at dinner parties where its bold presence commands the table. For American cheese lovers, it remains the forbidden fruit of the dairy world. Bottle sat on the shelf between the honey and the molasses, and it looked like something you'd clean a window with. Cloudy, amber, with strange filaments drifting near the bottom that your grandmother called the mother. Apple cider vinegar as a daily tonic had roots in Vermont folk medicine, popularized by D.C. Jarvis in his 1958 book that prescribed 2 teaspoons in water before meals for everything from arthritis to indigestion. The acetic acid supported digestion and helped stabilize blood sugar, though nobody in that kitchen used those terms. She just poured it, the same way her mother had, the raw, unpasteurized kind, with the cloudy sediment still alive at the bottom, carried enzymes and beneficial bacteria that the filtered clear vinegar on supermarket shelves couldn't match. By the 80s, the antacid industry had convinced Americans that stomach trouble required a pill, not a pantry staple. If apple cider vinegar was the tonic nobody wanted to talk about, those kitchens went quiet a long time ago. If you can still taste any of this, like and subscribe before the memory fades.